Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith, Photog J the Great. Today we're going to be looking at yet another Sony camera. Sony, they've been having a lot of really nice innovations lately. Today we're going to be looking at the new A3000. This is a very interesting camera to me. I've actually been playing with this one a lot more before this review video than I have, with most cameras in the past. When I say this is a very interesting camera to me, unfortunately that's not in a good way, but we're going to get to that in just a second. I'm going to start out by being more positive first though. Basically, in the world of entry-level DSLRs, that's probably the most competitive area for all the camera makers. So, obviously Nikon and Canon and Sony, they're not going to be selling as many $2,000 plus cameras as they do $400 and $500 and $600 cameras. And so that's kind of where this camera comes along. First of all, this is not an A-mount camera. This is an E-mount camera, and we'll be taking a closer look at this in a second. This is actually a mirrorless camera, so it's technically not a DSLR. Now, the thing that's a bit strange about this is one of the main advantages that a mirrorless camera has over a DSLR is the smaller and more compact size. As you can see, this pretty much looks like a DSLR. It doesn't really look like a small and compact mirrorless camera. But that brings me back to my previous statement. The entry-level DSLR market is extremely competitive. A digital SLR, though, is still something that's relatively expensive for a manufacturer to make. So Nikon and Canon right now, they both have models that are just below $500. They've got the Rebel T3 on Canon, and you also have the D3100 at Nikon. And both of those are around the $500 price mark, so very inexpensive as far as the DSLR goes. However, for most consumers, that's still going to be pretty expensive. One of the biggest things with the DSLR is once you add all the mechanical bits, like the mirror mechanism and mechanical shutter and all that, and the whole optical viewfinder path and everything, it's still actually pretty expensive to make a DSLR. And for the most part, most DSLRs still have to be more handmade, so that reflects in their cost. So what going mirrorless on a camera like this allowed Sony to do is it allowed the camera to be a lot simpler, and it's a very it's going to give the entry-level DSLR market a lot of very stiff competition, because this camera only cost it's like $399 USD. So now we're under $400 for a entry-level DSLR-like camera. You still have the full APS-C size sensor of a DSLR, but of course it's technically mirrorless. So that's the good news. Sony is able to give us something at a little bit lower price point. However, like the A58, I think that they cut too many corners. With the A58, I was talking about how it had a plastic lens mount and all that, and so that entry-level cost came, at a heavy price. And it's the same thing on this camera. I feel like they cut too many corners on this. But I'm going to go into detail about all this in just a moment. Yeah, the most frustrating thing about this is this camera. It's kind of the embodiment of the current camera industry. I think that they cut a lot of corners, which you're going to see in a moment. The other thing is that I don't like is I think that the camera manufacturers are confusing people a lot. In selling people cameras every day. Using cameras as a photographer and selling people cameras are two entirely different things. But in selling cameras to people, everyone is confused. They don't know if they should get a mirrorless camera or a compact camera or a DSLR. So over the years, it's gotten much harder to guide people. And a camera like this represents all my frustration with the camera industry in that area, because, you know, getting people's heads wrapped around the whole mirrorless thing was enough as it was. And now we're starting to have cameras that look like other types of cameras. Like this camera that looks like a DSLR, but it's really a mirrorless camera. And I know a lot of people won't care, but I'm going to show you why that's a bit of a downside. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this camera. So taking a quick close-up look at this camera, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to compare this size-wise to my Sony NEX5N. And so the 5N is what we've kind of come to expect in Sony E-mount mirrorless cameras. APS-C size sensor on something like this too, but of course notice how small this is. So like I was just mentioning before, that's typically one of the advantages that you would see with a mirrorless camera, is that small size. This mirrorless camera, however, is designed to not, it's not designed to give you small size. The biggest reason why this mirrorless camera is designed, frankly, is so that Sony has a cheaper product to sell. Because as I mentioned before, making a entry-level mirrorless camera is going to be a lot less expensive for them to produce. So yeah, if you look at this, we can see it's an E-mount camera, just like the 5N, and we have an APS-C size sensor in there. Okay, so anyways, enough with the comparison with the NEX5N. Put that away. Taking a closer look at this camera, it does have this one does use the newer 20 megapixel Sony sensor. We will be taking a look at some of the samples from this. Don't know if I'm going to put them in the video, but I will put them in the description if not. And yeah, Lightroom 5.2 was released yesterday, and one of the less significant parts of the update was the fact that it's now compatible with the RAW files from this camera. So as always, I will shoot in RAW at different ISOs, and I'll convert in Lightroom at the default settings, and you guys can take a look at those photos. Okay, so we'll start with the rear. It is a menu layout, just like the mirrorless cameras. So if you've used any of Sony's mirrorless cameras in the past, it's going to be very familiar to you. Relatively straightforward here. The biggest thing about this camera, you know, I used to think that the entry-level Canon Rebels like the T3 felt cheap. Well, this this makes the T3 feel like, you know, a 60D or D7000. I mean, this feels really, really cheap. We do have a viewfinder on here. It's not the best electronic viewfinder. I can't give it too much flack for that, because I don't consider any of the other entry-level DSLRs to have a really good viewfinder either, so I'm not going to really complain about that too much. This part around here actually is plastic, which is something that I immediately noticed as a glasses wearer. I'm not really too keen on that. Menu options, as I was just mentioning, though, are very, very similar. A few things I noticed in here, though. Under the quality, I thought it was kind of interesting that, you know, this is something that I don't think any entry-level DSLRs currently do, but I've noticed it on a few compact cameras that shot RAW. And a lot of those cameras have actually been changed from being set up this way. But this camera can't shoot RAW by itself. It can only do RAW plus JPEG. So if you want RAW, you know, you have to go to RAW plus JPEG. I thought that was kind of interesting. Couple other things I noticed. If we go under, let's see, actually I was already in the right menu. If we go under our movie mode options here, this one right here, impressively it still does up to 60 frames a second in 1080, but it is 1080i. Some of the higher models in Sony's range will do 1080p at 60 frames a second. So this is actually still kind of ahead of the competition, because you don't have the option of doing 60 frames a second at 1080 anything on the Nikon D3100. And of course the Rebel T3 doesn't even shoot 1080 video at all, it just does 720. So, you know, not that big of a deal. I think Sony is still ahead of the game here, but it is something worth mentioning. Let's see here. Take a look at this side of the camera. Yeah, Sony Fisher Price called. They want their card cover door back. Anyways, memory card here, of course SD cards, and this also has a mini USB connection right up there. Let's see what else. Oh yes, one thing that's kind of interesting too, like on some of Sony's other recent mirrorless cameras, like the NEX6 and the newer NEX5R, for example. This camera also charges through the USB port as well. So this one doesn't come with a separate charger. So you basically plug it in to charge it. Not really that big of a deal. It is a nice convenience factor. However, if you have an extra battery, you know, I recommend picking up Sony's external charger so you can charge your second battery while you're using another one in the camera. Speaking of batteries, this one is Sony's W series battery. This is a battery that we all know and love very well. It's used in pretty much every other Sony mirrorless camera at this point. This will get you just shy of 500 images per charge. You'll get about 470 or so, according to the official testing. So all in all, pretty straightforward. This camera comes with the 18 to 55 lens. You know, so fairly standard fare there. Just like any other entry-level DSLR. Who is this camera for? That's something I asked myself more than once when I was looking at it. This camera is mainly for people that, you know, that want an entry-level DSLR, that you know, just that want to get the cheapest thing possible. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. I realize that cost is going to be relative. You know, a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, 400 bucks is still a lot of money, well, and that's fine. I am, you know, coming from a little bit different spot, so for me, I would not buy this. If I were going to buy an entry-level DSLR, as a matter of fact, just to be fair, I wouldn't buy a 3100 or a Rebel T3 either. I mean, I would go up a little bit higher, probably. I'd probably go, if I could, I would go up at least to like a D3200 or a Rebel T3i, something along those lines. In Sony, I would go to anything else other than this in an interchangeable lens camera. The reason being is because if you want something, if you want a mirrorless camera, most people that buy mirrorless cameras want to have something smaller. So this obviously doesn't fit the bill there. And if they want something that's going to be a little bit more serious in the future, they're going to get something like a, I mean, even going with the A58, I wasn't terribly crazy about that camera to begin with, but even the A58, I would say get that over this. And the reason being is because one of my coworkers mentioned something interesting to me the other day. You know, a lot of people are going to buy this camera, and while they keep on adding more and more lenses to their E-mount system, a lot of people are going to buy this camera thinking that it's a DSLR, and then they're going to start looking at A-mount lenses later on. You know, or if they end up buying something like this, they may say, okay, well, my friend had some Sony lenses, and we'll be like, well, no, your friend's Sony lenses are A-mount lenses because they have an A77 or an A65 or whatever. So basically, if you want something that's going to be inexpensive, that's going to be, you know, very, very high on image quality, this is the camera for you. If, however, you want to do anything even remotely more serious, I recommend getting something. I recommend getting something like an A58 or a D3100 or a Rebel T3. And if you can, you know, if you see yourself getting even more serious in the future, I'd recommend going that next step higher to the $650, $700 price range if possible, and going with something like the Nikon D3200 or Rebel T3i. Those cameras are going to be a little bit better, and I'd imagine they have new models coming pretty soon. So this holiday season, they're probably going to be cheaper. So I'd say probably go with something along those lines. Couple of last minute thoughts I wanted to mention to you. The difference with the LCD screen is it is a little bit lower resolution than most these days. Most cameras are going to have at least a 900,000 dot approximately screen. Sorry, 900,000 dot. This one is 230,000, so it's a bit dated there. No doubt another way that Sony saved a few bucks, or probably a few nickels, making this camera. I guess I'm going to have to end this video on a good note. I don't want to leave it all bad. A couple good things I noticed is that you do have full manual mode in video. So in video mode, it is possible to change shutter speed and aperture and ISO, and you don't have to flip out of live view to do so. So I did like that. We'll go ahead and take a look. Actually, I think I'm just going to put the sample photos in the description, and you guys can take a look at those. I'll have some high ISO samples for you guys to see. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to write me in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you guys ever wonder what I might be doing a review on next, definitely follow me on Instagram and Twitter as well, at PhotogJTheGreat. I like to post a lot of photos of what I'm going to be reviewing next there. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, Photog J the Great, signing off.